There was once a king so powerful that nations trembled at the sound of his name. He conquered kingdoms. He destroyed cities. He built one of the greatest empires the ancient world had ever seen. His palace was magnificent. His wealth was enormous. His army was feared across the region. And when this king looked at everything he had accomplished, he believed he had every reason to be proud. But one day, while standing on the roof of his royal palace, he looked across the magnificent city of Babylon and said words that would change his life forever. "Is not this great Babylon, that I have built?" He had no idea that within moments, heaven would answer him. The proud king who believed he was at the height of human power would soon lose his mind, leave his palace, and live like a wild animal. His body would be exposed to the rain. His hair would grow like feathers. His fingernails and toenails would become like the claws of birds. And for a period described in the Bible as 7 times, he would live away from human society. But why? Why would God allow a powerful king to experience something so terrifying? Was Nebuchadnezzar actually transformed into an animal? Was this punishment for his cruelty? And what was God trying to teach him? The answer is one of the most powerful lessons about pride and humility in the entire Bible. Before we enter the story, if you enjoy Bible stories explained in a dramatic and easy-to-understand way, subscribe to Bible Storytime and turn on notifications. And if you believe that God can humble even the most powerful person, stay with me until the end, because Nebuchadnezzar's story contains a warning that is still relevant today. The story begins in the ancient kingdom of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar was not an ordinary king. He was the ruler of the mighty Babylonian Empire. Under his leadership, Babylon became one of the most impressive cities of the ancient world. Its walls were legendary. Its buildings were magnificent. Its wealth seemed almost limitless. Nebuchadnezzar had conquered nations and brought treasures back to Babylon. He had defeated Jerusalem and carried many people from Judah into exile. Among those exiles were 4 young men whose names became famous in the Bible: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Their Babylonian names were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego for the last 3. Nebuchadnezzar had already encountered Daniel several times. Daniel had interpreted dreams that no other wise man in Babylon could explain. He had revealed mysteries that seemed impossible for a human being to know. Nebuchadnezzar had also witnessed the miraculous deliverance of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego from the fiery furnace. So the king had already received more than one warning about the power of the God of Israel. He knew that Daniel's God was different. He knew that this God could reveal secrets. He knew that this God could rescue his servants. But knowing about God's power is not always the same thing as surrendering to God. And Nebuchadnezzar still had a problem: pride. One night, the king had another disturbing dream. He saw something enormous. In the dream, there was a tree standing in the middle of the earth. The tree was incredibly tall. It grew stronger and larger until its top reached toward heaven. Its leaves were beautiful. Its fruit was abundant. Animals found shelter beneath it. Birds lived in its branches. And people from different lands seemed to benefit from its abundance. It looked powerful. It looked unstoppable. Then suddenly, something terrifying happened. A messenger from heaven appeared. The messenger commanded that the tree be cut down. Its branches were to be chopped off. Its leaves stripped away. Its fruit scattered. The animals were to leave it. The birds were to flee. But then came a strange command. The stump and its roots were to remain in the ground. And the stump was to be bound with iron and bronze. Then the dream became even more mysterious. The voice declared that the heart of the tree would be changed from a man's heart into the heart of an animal. And it would remain this way for 7 times. Then came the reason. The purpose was so that the living might know that the Most High rules over the kingdom of mankind and gives it to whomever he wishes. Nebuchadnezzar woke up terrified. He called for his wise men, the magicians, the astrologers, the Chaldeans, the experts of Babylon. But none of them could explain the dream. Then Daniel entered. Nebuchadnezzar told him the dream. And Daniel immediately understood that the dream was not good news. For a moment, Daniel was deeply troubled. The king noticed his reaction and told him not to be afraid. Daniel then explained the meaning. The great tree represented Nebuchadnezzar himself. The tree represented his greatness, his power, his kingdom, and his influence. Just as the tree had become enormous, Nebuchadnezzar had become powerful. Just as creatures depended on the tree, many nations depended upon or lived under the influence of Babylon. But then came the terrible part. The tree would be cut down. Daniel told the king that he would be driven away from human society. He would live with the animals of the field. He would eat grass like cattle. He would be exposed to the dew of heaven. And his condition would continue until he recognized that the Most High rules over human kingdoms. Then Daniel gave the king something extremely important. A warning. He told Nebuchadnezzar to break away from his sins and practice righteousness. He urged him to show mercy to the oppressed. In other words, the dream was not simply a prediction. It was also an opportunity. God was warning the king before the judgment came. Nebuchadnezzar had time to change. He had time to humble himself. He had time to recognize that everything he possessed ultimately depended upon God. But 12 months passed, and the warning seemed forgotten. One day, Nebuchadnezzar was walking on the roof of his royal palace in Babylon. Imagine the scene. Below him was the magnificent city. The walls, the buildings, the wealth, the temples, the monuments, the evidence of his military victories. Everything he could see seemed to say one thing: "You are powerful." And then Nebuchadnezzar spoke. He said, "Is not this great Babylon, that I have built by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty?" Those words reveal the heart of the problem. He didn't say, "Look at what God has allowed me to accomplish." He said, "I built this. My power. My majesty." The king had begun to take credit for what ultimately existed under God's sovereign authority. And then heaven responded. While the words were still in the king's mouth, a voice came from heaven. The judgment announced in the dream was now arriving. Nebuchadnezzar was told that his kingdom had been taken from him. He would be driven away from people. He would live with the animals. He would eat grass like cattle. And he would remain in this condition until he recognized that the Most High rules over the kingdom of mankind. Then something extraordinary happened. Nebuchadnezzar lost his sanity. The Bible says that he was driven away from people and ate grass like cattle. His body became exposed to the elements. His hair grew like the feathers of an eagle. His nails became like the claws of birds. For a man who had lived inside one of the greatest royal palaces of his time, this was an unimaginable fall. The king who once sat on a throne was now living outside like an animal. The man who commanded armies could no longer command even himself. The man who built a magnificent empire could no longer enjoy it. The man who believed his greatness came from his own power had been brought down to the most humiliating condition imaginable. And this is where many people misunderstand the story. The Bible does not necessarily mean that Nebuchadnezzar physically transformed into a literal animal. Instead, Daniel describes a man whose mind and behavior became animal-like. He lived as an animal. He ate like an animal. He stayed away from human society. His appearance became wild. The central point was not that God magically changed his DNA. The central point was that God humbled the mind of a proud king. Nebuchadnezzar had wanted to exalt himself. Now he could no longer even function like an ordinary human ruler. He had everything. And then suddenly, he had almost nothing. For 7 times, the king remained in this condition. The exact meaning of 7 times is not explicitly defined in the chapter, although many interpreters understand it as 7 years. But regardless of the exact duration, the lesson was clear. Nebuchadnezzar's greatness had limits. His empire had limits. His power had limits. His life had limits. Only God's authority had no limit. And this is the moment where the story becomes even more powerful. Because God did not abandon Nebuchadnezzar. The judgment had a purpose. It was not simply destruction. It was correction. God was teaching the king something that his palace, his armies, his wealth, and his victories could never teach him. That lesson was humility. Nebuchadnezzar had spent his life looking upward from his throne, believing that he was above everyone. Now he was forced to look upward for another reason. He needed God. If you're still watching, I want you to pause for a moment and think about this. Nebuchadnezzar's problem was not that he was successful. His problem was that he believed his success made him independent of God. If this story is teaching you something, comment "God is in control" below. And if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe to Bible Storytime, because there are many more Bible mysteries and powerful stories still to uncover. Now, after the appointed period had passed, something changed. Nebuchadnezzar lifted his eyes toward heaven. That small action marked the turning point of his entire life. He finally recognized the truth. The king who once looked at Babylon and said, "I built this," now looked toward heaven. And his understanding returned. Then he praised the Most High. He honored the one whose authority lasts forever. Nebuchadnezzar finally understood what God had been trying to teach him from the beginning. Human kingdoms rise. Human kingdoms fall. Kings come and go. Empires appear and disappear. But God's kingdom is different. His dominion is everlasting. And Nebuchadnezzar made an extraordinary confession. He acknowledged that God does according to his will among the armies of heaven and the inhabitants of the earth. No human ruler can ultimately stop him. No human being can question his authority as though God were merely another king. And after Nebuchadnezzar lifted his eyes to heaven, his sanity returned. His kingdom was restored to him. His advisors and nobles came back to him. His position was returned. But the man who came back was not exactly the same man who had walked onto that palace roof. He had learned humility. He had learned that power does not make a person God. He had learned that wealth does not make a person independent. And he had learned that the Most High has authority over every human kingdom. The chapter ends with Nebuchadnezzar praising and honoring the King of Heaven. And then he makes one final statement that captures the entire lesson. Those who walk in pride, God is able to humble. Think about how powerful that statement is. Nebuchadnezzar had everything the world could offer. A throne. An empire. Fame. Wealth. Military power. Magnificent buildings. But none of those things could protect him from pride. His greatest battle was not against another army. It was against his own heart. And perhaps that is why this story is still so relevant today. You may never become a king. You may never rule an empire. You may never build a city like Babylon. But pride can enter anyone's heart. Sometimes it happens when we become successful. Sometimes when people praise us. Sometimes when we begin to believe that everything we have came only from our own strength. We forget the opportunities. We forget the people who helped us. And most importantly, we forget God. Nebuchadnezzar's story reminds us that success is not the problem. The danger begins when success makes us believe that we no longer need the one who gave us the ability to succeed. The king had to lose his position before he understood his position before God. He had to lose his human pride before he could recognize divine authority. And perhaps the greatest miracle in the story was not that his mind was restored. It was that his heart finally understood. The story of Nebuchadnezzar also gives us another important lesson about God's warnings. God warned him before judgment came. Daniel explained the dream. Daniel even gave him advice about changing his ways. Nebuchadnezzar had an opportunity to respond, but he ignored the warning. This reminds us that sometimes God's warnings are actually acts of mercy. A warning gives us an opportunity to change direction before consequences become unavoidable. The story also shows us something about God's patience. Nebuchadnezzar did not immediately experience judgment after the dream. The Bible says 12 months passed. He had time. But eventually, the moment came. His pride reached its height. And then God humbled him. But even after judgment, restoration was possible. That is an important part of the story. Nebuchadnezzar was not destroyed forever. His sanity returned. His kingdom was restored. And his mouth, which once glorified himself, began glorifying God. The same king who had looked at Babylon and praised his own greatness eventually praised the greatness of heaven. That is the transformation at the heart of Daniel chapter 4. Not simply a king becoming like an animal. A proud man becoming humble. A ruler recognizing that he himself was ruled. A powerful king discovering that there is a higher king. And perhaps the question for us is not simply, why was Nebuchadnezzar turned into a beast? Perhaps the deeper question is, what was God trying to remove from Nebuchadnezzar? The answer was pride. And sometimes the greatest thing God can teach a person is not how to become more powerful, but how to remember where their power came from. Nebuchadnezzar's story began with a man looking at everything he had built and saying, "I did this." It ended with that same man looking toward heaven and acknowledging the one who truly rules. That is why the story has survived for thousands of years. Because Babylon is gone. Nebuchadnezzar's palace is gone. His armies are gone. His earthly glory is gone. But the lesson remains. Human greatness is temporary. God's authority is eternal. So whenever success comes, remember humility. Whenever people praise you, remember the one who gave you your gifts. Whenever you rise, remember that there is still someone higher. And whenever you think you are completely in control, remember the lesson Nebuchadnezzar learned the hard way. The Most High rules over the kingdoms of mankind. Nebuchadnezzar wanted the world to know how great he was. But after his humiliation, he wanted the world to know how great God was. And that may be the greatest transformation of all. If this story touched you or taught you something, don't leave without subscribing to Bible Storytime. Share this video with someone who may need the reminder that no matter how powerful a person becomes, God is still in control. And before you go, write, "I choose humility," in the comments. Because the story of Nebuchadnezzar is not only about an ancient king who lost his mind. It is a warning. It is a lesson. And it is a reminder that pride can lift a person very high, but only God determines how long they remain there. Nebuchadnezzar looked at Babylon and thought he was standing at the top of the world. But heaven reminded him that there is always a throne higher than every earthly throne. And that throne belongs to God.